Today's captivating video unveils the fascinating cosmos within our skulls, where every evening our minds withdraw to a restful sanctuary, replenishing their energy reserves and preparing their demands for the coming day.
I wake up in the morning and I want to reach for my phone, but I know that even if I were to crank up the brightness on that phone screen, it's not bright enough to trigger that cortisol spike and for me to be at my most alert and focused throughout the day and to optimize my sleep at night.
This introduction merely sets the stage for a far more extensive exploration into the realm of sleep science, an area that continues to baffle and intrigue us.
Yoga Nidra is, I think, my favorite tool of all in all of mental enhancement or Yoga Nidra literally means yoga sleep. These are free scripts on YouTube. The one I like, you could just, I have no relation to them, but you could put Yoga Nidra Theta 30-minute. There's a Theta rhythm one that I happen to like, but there are many others. You have to pick one where the voice guides you through a number of self-relaxation steps. And sometimes there's an intention or something of that sort. And it brings your brain and body into a state that's very similar to sleep, but not quite sleep.
You know, the social media getting dopamine hit after dopamine hit. When we first get on social media for the first time or after a long period of time, the amount of dopamine that's released we think is quite substantial. It's novel. Remember, dopamine is about novelty, surprise, and the sense that we are on some exciting track. That's what dopamine is really about. It puts us into states of readiness, anticipation, looking, seeking, etc., almost always for things outside the confines of our skin. Just to contrast it maybe for a bit more of a future discussion, serotonin does the opposite. When there's a lot of serotonin in our brain and body, typically it makes us feel satisfied, sated, and more quiescent, comfortable with what we have in our own immediate sphere and within us, right? The comfort of a good meal, the food you have, dopamine is about go, go, go. If you look at somebody who's high on cocaine or methamphetamine, it's all about pursuit because that's a very dopaminergic drug. You look at somebody who's taken a drug, and I'm not suggesting people do this, but it really ramps up serotonin. Let's say a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, Prozac, Zoloft, etc. The side effects of those drugs, if the dosages are too high, lack of appetite, lack of libido, kind of meh about life, then so they'll adjust the dose down. That's because those are serotonergic drugs.
Yoga Nidra done 1 to 3 times per week has an immensely powerful effect on teaching you how to deliberately turn off your thoughts. It's allowed me to work in, I think, a far more concentrated way than I would otherwise. It's used now in a lot of trauma release programs. People who are dealing with a lot of overwhelm will do Yoga Nidra for 30 minutes or 20 minutes, or sometimes even an hour a day. And there are a few studies, mainly out of Scandinavia, showing that 30 minutes of a Yoga Nidra script can reset levels of dopamine in the area of the brain called the basal ganglia, which is involved in planning and action and controlling reflexive behaviors versus deliberate behaviors. It's a very powerful tool. You asked when to do it. I like to do it in the morning, right after I wake up, if I felt I haven't slept enough. And the reason for not sleeping enough could be because I couldn't fall back asleep. I'm ruminating. I have to get up and work that day. I come out of that Yoga Nidra always feeling as if I slept more than enough. It's really remarkable.
Cloud cover, and I can't see the sun. I also know I'm doing a good thing because it turns out, especially on cloudy days, you want to get outside and get as much light energy or photons in your eyes. But let's say it's a very clear day and I can see where the sun is. I do not need to stare directly into the sun. If it's very low in the sky, I might do that because it's not going to be very painful to my eyes. However, if the sun is a little bit brighter and a little bit higher in the sky, sometimes it can be painful to look at. So the way to get this sunlight viewing early in the day is to look toward the sun. If it's too bright to look at directly, well, then don't do that. You just look toward it, but not directly at it. It's absolutely fine to blink. In fact, I encourage you to blink whenever you feel the impulse to blink. Never look at any light, sunlight or otherwise, that's so bright that it's painful to look at because you can damage your eyes. See, there's a tolerance that's built up with drinking a lot, but I believe the number is approximately 8% of people have a mutation in a gene such that when they drink alcohol, it increases their dopamine levels very quickly and they get euphoric. They feel great. These are the people like that character in Mad Men, the Don Draper character, like he would go out and just get plastered and the next day, he's all fresh and ready. And part of that is tolerance. But in certain Scandinavian countries, Northern European countries, this gene tends to be more prevalent. And these people are the people that can just keep drinking and drinking. They feel great when they drink, whereas most people, they feel disinhibited at the beginning. You have a couple drinks, the forebrain shuts down a little bit because that's what it does. They start talking more, but if they keep drinking, they're blacking out, they're stumbling, they're slurring their words. In general, when we are in pursuit of things, dopamine is quite high. So now you have to remind me your question, because I've set up the dopamine serotonin parallel.
Smartphones.
Cell phones, yes. Forgive me. So the thing about cell phones is when you first get on there and you have them, let's say you're no Wi-Fi on the flight or something, and you land, it can actually be quite stimulating. You get a lot of dopamine. Oh, there's this. Oh, there's that. But very quickly, when you're scrolling on social media, you're no longer getting the novelty, but you're continuing to do it and you almost don't know why you're doing it. At that point, it shifts over to something that's a bit more like an obsessive compulsive behavior, where we can define an obsessive compulsive behavior where the obsession leads to a compulsion. So the obsession is a thought, the compulsion is a behavior, but the acting out of the compulsion merely serves to increase the obsession. This is not some woo biology thing. This is grounded in the core of our physiology. There are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of quality peer-reviewed papers showing that light viewing early in the day is the most powerful stimulus for wakefulness throughout the day, and it has a powerful positive impact on your ability to fall and stay asleep at night. So this is really the foundational power tool for ensuring a great night's sleep and for feeling more awake during the day. Second of all, if you wake up before the sun is out, you can and probably should flip on artificial lights in your internal home environment or apartment or wherever you happen to live if your goal is to be awake. Right? If you wake up at 4 a.m. and you need to be awake, well, then turn on artificial lights. Once the sun is out, however, once the sun has risen, then you still want to get outside and view sunlight. Some of you will wake up before the sun comes out, and if you're asking whether or not turning on artificial lights can replace sunlight at those hours, unfortunately, the answer is no. Unless you have a very special light, we'll talk about what kind of light, the bright artificial lights in your home environment are not, I repeat, are not going to be sufficiently bright to turn on the cortisol mechanism and the other wake-up mechanisms that you need early in the day. The diabolical twist, however, is that those lights in your home or apartment or even on your phone are bright enough to disrupt your sleep if you look at them too late at night or in the middle of the night. Mistakes made in the early days of neuroscience because of looking at the number of neurons or the number of connections. A good example would be the raphe nucleus of the brainstem manufactures serotonin, sends an enormous projection to the circadian clock of the hypothalamus. And there have been dozens of experiments evaluating the role of serotonin in that pathway and its ability to shift the circadian system. And thus far, it seems like barely any influence. Who knows what it's doing? We assume it's doing something, but it's not doing anything obvious based on the experiments that have been done. Retinal, our eye biology, and in our brain's biology, whereby early in the day, right around waking, you need a lot of light, a lot of photons, a lot of light energy. And artificial lights generally just won't accomplish what you need them to accomplish. But at night, even a little bit of artificial light can really mess up your so-called circadian, your 24-hour clocks, and all these mechanisms that we're talking about. So if you wake up before the sun is out and it's still dark, please turn on as many bright artificial lights as you possibly can or need, but then get outside once the sun is out. On cloudy days, you especially need to get outside. I repeat, on cloudy days, overcast days, you especially need to get outside and get sunlight. You just need to get more of it. Now, how much light and how much light viewing do you need? This is going to vary depending on person and place, literally where you live on Earth, whether or not there's a lot of tree cover, whether or not you're somebody who has sensitive eyes or less sensitive eyes. It's really impossible for me to give an absolute prescriptive, but we can give some general guidelines. In general, on a clear day, meaning no cloud cover or minimal cloud cover, you want to get this sunlight exposure to your eyes for about 5 minutes or so. Could be 3 minutes one day, could be 7 minutes the next day, about 5 minutes. So most people with 20/20-ish vision or with corrective lenses or with LASIK can see 60 cycles per degree. Some people are better, fighter pilots, etc. Someone
might be 65,
yeah,
whatever.
Exactly.
Okay.
a raptor bird of the sort that I saw this morning here in Texas, like a red-tailed hawk or red-shouldered hawk, sees at 120 cycles per degree. So that means they can sit up on a light pole and look down at the ground and see a small gopher raise its head in the ground, and it will look like they'll perceive it. They might not be able to count the whiskers on that gopher's face, but they'll be able to perceive that movement. Now, this is interesting because we have a pupil, we have a fovea behind that. A fovea is just a concentration. A fovea actually means a pit, but a concentration of retinal cells that allows us to see at highest acuity in the central vision. How do we know this? Well, you can put your hand out to the side and you know your fingers are waving off in your periphery. For those just listening, I'm just putting my fingers off to the side of my head while looking at Peter. And I can see that they're moving, but I can't really count them. If it wasn't my hand, I wouldn't know how many fingers were there. As I move my hand more toward in front of my face, I can count them. So central vision, we have more pixels, if you will, than in peripheral vision. Learning is a two-stage process. And the learning I'm referring to is specifically deliberate learning. You know, children are learning passively all the time. They're taking in new information. Their brain it's not a complete tabula rasa. It's not a complete blank slate. There's some hardwired functions they show up with, thank goodness, like breathing. Like heart rate, controlling heart rate.
That helps.
But that helps. I mean, offload as much as you can to the genetic program to hardwire the nervous system so they can learn how to walk. And walking is a good example. A kid learns how to walk and then walks reflexively. But of course, at any stage, you can think about how you're walking. You could do hopscotch, and you have to change your cadence of jumping and walking, right? So that's this flexible transition between voluntary and involuntary movement, but you have to learn how to walk. What we're talking about now is generally deliberate learning, language learning, skill learning, learning knowledge of any kind, learning how to, navigate the emotional dynamics of a relationship, anything. Two phases. One is active engagement and focus. Much of the trigger for neuroplasticity as a process is engaged by dopamine and norepinephrine and a molecule called acetylcholine, which is liberated from multiple sources. That we always talked about how acetylcholine controls the contraction of muscles, but in the brain, acetylcholine mainly comes from two sets of neurons, one in the brainstem and another in the basal forebrain, and it serves as a kind of a highlighter, marking particular connections or neurons that later stand a chance to become stronger. So let me give an example. I don't speak a second language, but let's say I decide I was going to learn conversational French. I would learn some nouns or some verbs. I would focus on this, and the greater degree of focus that I bring, the greater amount of acetylcholine is released at that time, and at the particular locations in the brain they're involved in enunciating the words and writing the comprehension, multiple spots within the brain. That kind of marks those or flags those areas as potentially changing later. But the actual rewiring of the nervous system happens during states of deep sleep or sleep-like states. And so so when we say neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change in response to experience, that's a two-part process. It's a process. It's not an event. We always think about things as events, but in biology, almost everything is a process.